Welcome back to the Shed. Today I want to take a look at the 1993 Hugo Award winning novel that shared the Hugo with Connie Willis's Doomsday Book in '93, which is Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. Now this is a really cool novel. It's over 600 pages, so it's a chunky old novel, 600 odd pages. So what I'd like to do is provide a bit of a plot overview, talk to what I liked, what I didn't like. We'll put it to the memory test. I'll make some recommendations and we'll rank it on our Hugo and Nebula Award winning Shed Ladder that I've got going on here, where I'm ranking all the Hugo and Nebula Award winning novels. But what I would also like to do is sort of do a bit of a whiteboard on this galaxy, this world that Vernor Vinge has built, because it's got a really interesting concept and one that I sort of want to break down a little bit when we look at our board. So the story begins with this research expedition looking at the lower transcend, and we'll draw this up on the board later on so you get a bit of a visual of what this world building looks like from Vernor Vinge. So they're in this lower transcend and they're looking at these ancient archives. And what we find is that they've accidentally unleashed some kind of superpower, some super intelligence. And it's not quite understood what this super intelligence is, but it is some kind of threat. And the research expedition understands this and they try to flee. So they eventually land on this medieval world run by these animals called tines. And these animals, these beings, actually are intelligent. So they're intelligent life forms. And they've got a really interesting social makeup because they're made up of a group mind. So like there's 6 or so of them in a pack that acts as an individual, and the names sort of reflect the different pack members. So it's really a rather interesting concept and one that I find really enjoyed. Anyway, so they land on this planet of the Tines, this medieval planet, and they're automatically attacked by this clan of Tines called the Flenterist. So they attack the spaceship, which is crewed of 2 human adults, a mother and father, and the 2 adolescent children in Jeffrey and Johanna, who are sort of pre-teens. So they're being attacked by these Flenterists, and they become separated. The parents are killed and the children are separated. But witnessing all of this is another clan. It's an actual pilgrim, this Tine who happens to be a pilgrim, who notices that the spaceship has landed, and this is very, incredible for them. Like this is a medieval sort of world, right? Where space travel doesn't exist. So this pilgrim has noticed the crew being attacked by these Flenterists and rescue one of the children in Joanna. So they take her away to this other clan who's led by this Tine called Woodcarver. So she goes off with Woodcarver and Jeffrey remains with the Flenterist clan. And these Flenterist clans have been at war, so they've been clashing for some time, and they're trying to get the edge on one another, and the Flenterist who are the aggressor sort of side with Jeffrey, and they sort of trick him into believing that they're the good guys and Woodcarver is out to kill them. And he gets the help from another spaceship who's received a beacon. They received an emergency beacon and they come to the rescue. And I'll come back to the spaceship. But Jeffrey's working with the crew of that spaceship in helping the Flenterists build equipment like cannons and additional firearms, right? On the other side of the fence, we have Joanna, who thinks her brother's dead, also working with the Woodcarver, these Tines. She's got a device which seems to be some kind of tablet which holds all the resources like the internet in its little sort of box thing, right? So she's been working with the Woodcarvers in building artillery like guns and weapons as well. So we have these 2 different clans working to build their armory into what would potentially be an all-in-war. So the crew of the spaceship who's received this beacon from the children's spaceship is on the way to rescue the children. But they've also heard about this superpower, this super intelligence thing, right? So they're sort of already worried. The crew's made up of the human not from Earth, so Earth is past gone. This is a war and truly into the future. So the world is far gone, but we have this human crew member in Ravna, and also by some other individual, a guy called Pham. And Pham is actually human, But here's the construct of this superpower. When we go back to the board and describe what Vernor Vinge's universe looks like, it sort of makes sense who Fam is. Because Fam is this human who's been downloaded with a power, and we'll come back to that, to help combat this threat, right? This imminent threat. So it's a bit weird, this spaceship, because it's also made up of these other two aliens, these Sco Riders. I can never pronounce it properly. These Sco Riders, who are these sort of seaweed-looking creatures, very interesting creatures, but they've been gifted in the past with some kind of equipment that allows them to travel. It's almost like a little buggy that they sit on top of, right, which is sort of mechanical and artificial intelligence built into it. So as they come into the children, we have this ever-present threat of this blight, this super intelligence that's been unleashed, and we're not quite sure what really happens there. On the other hand, we have the children who've been torn apart, been separated, been fed lies against each other, also coming to a head, and we have all this stuff happening to ultimately the climax of the book. So look, I found it to be a pretty enjoyable read. It's a pretty long read. It's 612 odd pages, this Fire Upon the Deep, and the sequel is not much shorter. It's actually a lot larger. So you're in for a treat, right, if you like your thick novels, because the two sort of go hand in hand. But it's a pretty interesting book in itself. So what do I like? Look, I think Vernor Vinge has done a wonderful piece of world building here. It's a really strong concept, this galaxy, and the way it's sort of divided, and hopefully I can do it justice when we look at it on the board. But it's a pretty cool concept. So I really enjoyed the concept of these zones within the universe and how they interact and how they operate. Really fascinating. I really enjoyed the concept of that. The other thing that was very enjoyable for me was the Tines themselves, these creatures, and how they worked, as an individual, but they were made up of, 6 or more, or sometimes less, different members, right, into that one pack that made the individual. And I sort of really enjoyed that. And I really enjoyed the challenges that kind of mind and that kind of alien would have. So I think Vernor Vinge did a really good job of describing what these aliens not only look like, but also how they fought and how in some ways they were advantaged by having that group mind, but he also illustrated the disadvantages that they had. So I found that really interesting in a novel. The other thing that I really enjoyed is the whole mystery of this intelligence that they've unleashed, For, a really good part of the book, you're sort of wondering, what is this? Why is it a threat? How will it manifest itself? What's its ultimate aim? So those questions were brought up through the novel, and I think he did a really nice job of just keeping that mystery and that suspense throughout. So I did enjoy that aspect of the novel as well. What about the things I didn't enjoy? Look, it's not that I didn't enjoy them necessarily, but I just thought it was a bit of padding and I didn't quite, it was a bit anticlimactic for me. There's a section in the novel that starts literally about 3/4 of the way through the book, and we're introduced to a whole lot of different characters, and I won't talk to what they are as to not give spoilers away, but about 3/4 of the way through the novel, we're introduced to a whole lot of new characters, which sort of come. They do their little bit and then they go and we never hear from them again. And I don't know, I found it a bit late in the piece. I didn't quite feel it really added to my overall enjoyment of the novel. And I think the actual action scenes were a bit anticlimactic for me as well. Look, it could have been a personal thing. I'm not sure. Maybe I had a bad day and I might have been not reading it to my full potential. But I don't know. I just found it a bit like, you've introduced all these characters. I'm not really quite sure whether or not I really care for these characters. And I thought the action scene itself was a bit anticlimactic. But that's not to take away anything from the novel, right? That's just, like I said, I'm sitting on the fence because I had a headache that day. I remember having a migraine the day I was reading that particular section of the novel. So it could be a personal thing. My mind was not just right that day. But yeah, that's the only thing I sort of took away that I thought, I don't know, just not quite sure this needs to be in here. The other thing I would say is that at times, and I'm really sitting on the fence, but at times I thought it was just a little tad stretched out. It's not as bad as I've seen on the Shed Ladder in some of the past novels of this, girth. But yeah, there was just some sections in there that I thought were just a little bit stretched out. but I'm not going to call it a criticism. I'm just going to call it an observation and something that didn't really take away from my enjoyment. But yeah, be mindful of that, I suppose. So when it comes to the memory test, I first read Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. It must have been 98, 99 time frame, so getting on almost 25 years or so ago. And look, when I was reading through it, to be honest, much of the plot I couldn't recall, but what I did recall quite clearly were the Tynes and the way they interacted and their group mind. I really enjoyed that aspect of the novel this time round, and it was the thing that I remembered most, right, is the Tynes and how they worked and the social makeup. As interesting as I found the concept, and like I said, we'll draw it on the board so you get a bit of a feel for that. As much as I enjoyed the concept, I can't say I remembered much of the concept as well. I remembered that it had some kind of construct, this universe of Vernor Vinge's, but I couldn't remember much more of that. So as I got to relearn the universe in Vernor Vinge's novel here, I started to reappreciate it for what it was, but I didn't really take much away in that 25-year hiatus that I've had from this book. Look, but still a very thoroughly enjoyable read. Now, who would I recommend Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep? Because it is a thick novel, right? And I tend to find it difficult to recommend a novel of this girth to new science fiction readers unless they're really avid readers already, unless they've really read a lot of fantasy and they're used to really big, thick novels. Would I be comfortable in recommending this to a new science fiction reader, right? So I would say it's not one for the new science fiction readers, but if you're a new science fiction reader and you really like, big, thick novels and you're not shy to run away from something like that, I think there is a lot to enjoy for a first-time science fiction reader in this. The other high recommendation I would make, it's a very much a space opera, this novel, right? It's got all you would expect to see in a big, thick space opera novel. And it does reveal some really interesting learnings of the universe in Vernor Vinge's story here. So I think, yeah, if you like space opera, you won't be deterred from Fire Upon the Deep. I think there's a lot to enjoy in this novel. Hey, so I want to set the board up and we'll just break down this concept of, the deepness in the sky, right? What this deep and the universe looks like. We'll draw it up on the board. I'll flip the board and then we'll rank it on our sci-fi, and then we'll flip the board and we'll rank it on our Sci-Fi Shed Ladder. So one of the things that I really enjoyed in Vernor Vinge's universe in A Fire Upon the Deep is the construct of the universe itself. So what I want to do is just sort of draw that out to give you a bit of a visual representation of how this universe is panned out, because it sort of makes it interesting to understand and get full enjoyment of the novel. So what we have in Vernor Vinge's universe is the center of the universe in this sort of circle that I'm representing here. And the first layer of this in the universe, closest to the galactic center, is what they call the unthinking depths, right? And what happens in this part of the galaxy is that intelligent life is pretty much non-existent, right? So there's not much that happens in the unthinking depths as far as intelligent life form. So the further you travel into the galactic center, the less you'll find intelligent life forms. The next sort of ring around that is what is referred to as the slow zone. And this slow zone is where we find old Earth, right? So old Earth, let's just draw Earth and this little moon there, is where you would find Earth. And you're sort of restricted to the technologies that we sort of currently have here on planet Earth, right? And the same kind of intelligent beings within this zone. So faster than light travel is really not known within the slow zones. And that's sort of where old Earth used to be. Outside of that, we have what is referred to in the novel as the beyond. And this is where the majority of the novel takes place, in this outer edges called the beyond. And what we find in the beyond is that faster than light travel is possible, and also a whole lot of automation as well, right? Artificial intelligence automation. And this artificial intelligence is really intelligent, right? It's not sort of machine learning in that sense, but true AI. Now, what we find with the Beyond is that you can travel to these between boundaries, right? So it's not that you can't travel between boundaries, but you run the risk that, if you were in a faster than light travel ship with full automation to calculate the jump points, and you somehow make yourself back into the slow zone in the Earth, then you're going to have like centuries of time elapse before you could get back into the Beyond, right, where faster than light travel is required. And that's where you find, the ships that do travel between the slow zone and the Beyond have additional sleeping chambers where they can go into cryogenic sleep, which is exactly what we found with the crew that was stranded on that time world, which was part of that slow zone, right? So yeah, there's a big warning there that if you're traveling between the slow zone and the Beyond, there's a lot of time factors that come into play. And now outside of the Beyond, is what we call the Transcend. Well, at least what Vernor Vinge calls the Transcend. Anyway, the Transcend. And this is where these superpowers, they call them the powers. And that's where these powers reside, right? And these powers can sort of communicate with the people in the Beyond, but they don't often do that. They're sort of, transcended. They're sort of above that, but they do sort of contact. And a lot of the equipment and a lot of the technology that we have in FTL has sort of crept in from this transcend sort of layer of the galaxy, right? So really interesting concept. And the other thing that I forgot to mention during my review that I really enjoyed as well, the communication that happens within the Beyond there, and sometimes outside of the Beyond as well to the Transcend, is very reminiscent of the old Usenet sort of messaging board system that we had back in the 80s and 90s, right? So I thought that was pretty cool because every chapter almost has some kind of correspondence that's happening in this form of communication in the Beyond, which I thought was really cool as well. Look, I just wanted to do that to sort of maybe get a mental picture of what these universes look like in Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep, because it sort of does help understand the novel. You don't have to do this, obviously, to get full enjoyment of the book, but it helps with the mental picture for me, at least. We've got to rank it. It's going to be an interesting one, so let me flip the board and we'll get to ranking this great novel. So back to the Shed Ladder and ranking today's Hugo Award winning novel for 93 in Vernor Vinge's A Fire Upon the Deep. Now on the board, we've got 3 columns going, the top 20 or so, the middle bunch, and the best of the rest. And I would love to start with Connie Willis's Doomsday Book that shared the Hugo, but I don't think it's going to make the top half, the top third of the list so far. Some of the things that I look for when I'm making these decisions is how well developed is the plot? Does it include some twists and turns, some surprises, or just very good concepts, right? I look at the character development. How well developed are these characters? Do they reveal something interesting and unique about humanity? I look at the world building and things like the fantasy elements and or the science fiction themes. How strong are these themes? How memorable are these themes? I look at the overall memory test, like how well have they stood the test of time and my overall enjoyment. So when I couple of those things together, I'm finding it difficult to rank it on the A side because there's some truly unforgettable novels on that A side of the board. So for me, this novel sits somewhere in the middle, and just whereabouts in the middle is what we're hoping to work through together. So what comes to mind when I was reading through The Fire Upon the Deep, I kept going back to David Brin for some reason, because in some ways it sort of reminded me of that. The plot was an interesting plot, but you can break it down pretty simply as there's the 2 siblings who've gone through some pretty traumatic experience. They've been separated. They need to come to some kind of resolution and reunite, right, with each other. And they've got to overcome some challenges with the times and the war that's happening with the times, and this generally large overall threat to humanity and all life in the universe. And I don't know, it must have been something about the writing which I do feel Vernor Vinge's writing is better than what we find in David Brent's Uplift Wars. But I'm going to sort of start in the middle here. And because one of the reasons is that I've forgotten a lot of the plot, right? I remember the times, like I said, I clearly remember the times, but I couldn't really recall much of the plot. And I really couldn't remember anything about the resolution, how the problem was resolved, right? And I sort of took that as a bit of a negative, right? Because I couldn't remember it, which means it didn't have that overall impact. And when I was reading through this time again, I think one of the weaknesses for me was also the ending, right? So yeah, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. And I'm going to probably start with Babel 17. And with Babel 17, I would say that, yeah, look, this overall is a much more enjoyable read than Babel 17. I think the characters are better developed. I think the writing is probably on par. I'll probably give the writing actually to Samuel R. Delaney's. I think his writing is better. But I'd say that the storyline and the plot and the mystery for me was more enjoyable than it was in Babel 17. I really enjoyed Man Plus by Frederick Pohl, but it had some faults, that book, right? It had some things that I couldn't really reconcile in my head that didn't quite make sense. And is A Fire Upon the Deep better than Man Plus? I think it's a more enjoyable read all up, right? I don't know. It could be a bias. Again, this is very biased, right? This is my personal opinion. But I do enjoy a big novel, right? I do like sitting down with a big novel and just working my way through it and just enjoying it. So I think that may have part to play in this, but I'm going to say I did overall enjoy it more than Man Plus. Startide Rising, I would say, is where it gets interesting, because Startide Rising had a very interesting concept with that uplift process. But like I mentioned in the past, I didn't really care much for those dolphins, right? Those flying dolphins. I just couldn't get over that speed bump in my head around dolphins with fat fingers being able to fly airships. But conceptually it was a pretty strong work. But I've got to say the concepts explored in Fire Upon the Deep, with the way that universe is structured, with the way these super intelligent beings and the powers in this threat are manifested, I thought was really strong as well. So I'm going to give it to A Fire Upon the Rising as being better than Startide Rising. And it's going to be better than the Uplift War, because this is where it gets interesting. And I'm going to put it above the Uplift War. I was debating this for a little while off camera, but I've got to say that the Uplift War was a good book, but I think overall I enjoyed A Fire Upon the Deep a little bit better. And I think it is around the grand scale of this novel, right? When you look at the universe and the way it's structured, I think it's very unique. And I think conceptually is little bit stronger than what we found in the Uplift War. Because they really talked, to genetic manipulation of these subservient species like apes and dolphins, and uplifting them to a level of intelligence of man, right? So that was sort of the strong concept. But I really did enjoy the breakdown of the universe and the different kind of beings and the challenges you would have in traversing these zones as well, right? So I would have to say that A Fire Upon the Deep is stronger than it was the Uplift War. And I'm probably going to have to give it to Rite of Passage as well, above Rite of Passage as well, because for me, it is a very strong concept. And I did remember more of A Fire Upon the Deep than I did Rite of Passage. As much as I found that a really enjoyable novel, I think I'm going to rate it over Rite of Passage. And Flowers for Algernon, my good old nemesis, always stumps me. Because the only reason Flowers for Algernon is there, and I've mentioned in the past, is because like when I look at the rankings and one of the weighted inputs I have, which is how strong is the fantasy or science fiction themes, that's where Flowers for Algernon for me doesn't really have much science fiction at all. Because all that it makes science fiction is basically a surgery that doesn't exist, because everything else just reads as a wonderful piece of fiction, right? And that's in a way strongly against it. But the writing, the characters, it brings you to tears, that novel. It's a wonderful novel. I love it. But I'm going to say the concepts, right? That weighted input, maybe one day I should break down my weighted inputs. but the weighting, that how strong the science fiction or fantasy theme in a novel is really heavily weighted. As much as it pains me, I'm going to have to say that as a science fiction novel, A Fire Upon the Deep is better than Flowers for Algernon, purely on the science fiction themes that it explores. I'm going to have to say the same about Red Shirts. Red Shirts for me was, again, I'm a big, huge Trekkie fan, and there's some bias there because I really love the idea that he explored there. But the writing in A Fire Upon the Deep, the concepts explored are stronger than they are in Red Shirts. And that's where I'm going to leave it, though. Because Demolished Man, for me, was just a perfect reverse murder mystery novel, right? It's a really strong writing. I'm a sucker for vintage science fiction, so I think that's got a part to play, because we're talking about 1953 to 93, so a 40-year gap between those books. And I think that I really do enjoy reading, historic vintage science fiction novels. But I really did enjoy the themes. We're talking about these humans who have got special abilities that they can almost read minds. They do actually read minds. And we have a murder that happens in that environment. And how does one, hide murder in a universe where minds can be read, right? But overall, the writing was just beautiful in Alfred Besser's The Demolished Man. So I'm going to whack it there. I think I'm okay with that. What have we got? The Claw of the Conciliator, another wonderfully written novel, very interesting novel. Yeah, and we definitely can't rank it above Ringworld. We definitely can't rank it above Ringworld, because those science fiction themes in Ringworld are just brilliant. Hey, that's where we stand today. I hope you enjoy that, and I'll see you next time in the shed.